My name is Roy Whittaker, and I am 46 years old. 6 weeks ago, I stood in the back of a packed town hall meeting and watched a sheriff's deputy walk up to a young man named Derek Malloy in front of the entire town and ask him to empty his pockets, and I watched Derek pull out a folded stack of marked $20 bills that he could not possibly explain, bills that had been photographed and recorded 3 days earlier, bills that a thief had taken from a place only the real thief would have known to look. The whole room went silent. Derek Malloy looked up from that money in his hand, and his eyes came straight to me at the back of the room, because he understood all at once that the quiet older man he had spent 2 months branding a thief in front of this whole town had not spent those 2 months hiding in shame. Derek had framed me for stealing from the fire department I gave 25 years of my life to, and he had just reached into a trap I built for him, in front of everyone whose respect he had stolen along with mine. For 2 months, Derek Malloy had convinced this town that I, Roy Whittaker, a volunteer firefighter for a quarter of a century, had been embezzling from the Copper Creek Volunteer Fire Department. He did it to cover his own theft, and he did it to destroy the man standing between him and the fire chief's job he wanted so badly. He was good at it. He had documents, he had a story, he had a discrepancy in the books with my name all over it, and for 2 months I watched people I had run into burning buildings to save cross the street to avoid me. But here is the one thing Derek Malloy did not understand about the man he decided to frame. To make me the thief, he had to build a timeline of when the money went missing, and a volunteer firefighter's whole life is a timeline. Every call I have ever answered in 25 years is written down to the minute in the dispatch logs and the run reports, an official record I do not control and cannot fake, and that Derek never thought to check. He built his whole frame on the assumption that no one would be able to prove where I was. He had no idea that where I was on the nights that mattered was written in the county's own records, with a siren and a truck and a whole crew of witnesses. He framed a man whose alibi was on fire. Before we get into this, if you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And while you are here, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the department that raised me, and to the young man I trained with my own hands who I never dreamed would try to burn my name to the ground. I grew up in Copper Creek, a town of about 4,000 people in the high country, where the winters are long, and the nearest real city is 90 minutes down a mountain road. In a town like that, the volunteer fire department is not just a service, it is the spine of the whole community. When your house catches fire at 2 in the morning in January, it is not a paid crew from the city that comes. It is your neighbors, pulling on their gear in the dark, leaving their own warm beds to save yours. My father was on the Copper Creek department, and his father before him, and I grew up understanding that in our family, when the siren went off, you went. No matter what you were doing, no matter the hour, no matter the weather, because someday it would be your house and you would want your neighbors to come. I have one memory that is the whole thing in miniature. I was maybe 8, and it was Christmas Eve, and we were about to open one present each the way we always did before bed, and the siren went off. And my father, without a word of complaint, without so much as a sigh, set down his coffee, kissed my mother, and pulled on his boots. And he was gone into the snow, and he did not come back until nearly dawn, smelling of smoke. Because a family on the other side of town had had a chimney fire on Christmas Eve, and my father had spent the night making sure they still had a home to wake up in. And I remember lying in bed, a little angry as a boy that Christmas had been interrupted, and my mother sitting on the edge of my bed and telling me, "Roy, your daddy didn't ruin Christmas. He saved somebody else's." I did not fully understand it, until I had pulled on my own boots on my own Christmas Eves for 25 years. That is what the department is. That is what Derek Malloy tried to make people believe I would steal from. You have to understand the height of the thing, to understand how far he was trying to make me fall. I joined the department the week I turned 21, and I've answered its calls for 25 years. I want to tell you what that actually means, not to boast, but because it is the thing Derek Malloy tried to erase, and you cannot understand what he did without understanding what he did it to. 25 years of leaving Thanksgiving dinner half-eaten when the tones dropped. 25 years of my wife Karen learning to sleep through the pager and wake instantly when it was mine. I have pulled people out of car wrecks on that mountain road. I have carried a neighbor's child out of a smoke-filled house. I have stood in a friend's driveway at 4 in the morning and told him there was nothing we could do to save the barn. And I have gone back the next day to help him start again. I have been to the fires that we won and the ones we lost, and I have carried both kinds home. By this year, I was the assistant chief, second in command, and the old chief, a man named Walt Brenner, who had led us for 30 years and taught me everything, was getting ready to retire, and everyone in that department understood, without anyone having to say it, that Roy Whitaker would be the next chief of the Copper Creek Volunteer Fire Department. It was the honor of my life coming toward me, earned one call at a time over 25 years. And it was exactly the thing Derek Malloy decided he wanted more than he wanted his own integrity. Let me tell you about Derek, because the betrayal is the heart of this, and I want to be fair to him even now. Derek Malloy joined the department about 6 years ago in his early 30s, and I trained him. I want you to sit with that. I was his mentor. I taught that young man how to hold a hose line, how to read smoke, how to check a door for heat before he opened it, how to stay alive in a place that wants to kill you. He was talented, genuinely, quick and brave and ambitious, and I was proud of him, the way you are proud of someone you have poured yourself into. I saw him almost as a younger brother or maybe a son, since Karen and I were not able to have our own. What I did not see, because I did not want to see it, was that Derek's ambition did not have a flaw under it. He did not just want to be good. He wanted to be chief soon, and he did not want to wait the 15 or 20 years it would normally take. And he had begun to understand that the one thing standing between him and that chief's job, that title, that standing in the town, was me. And Derek Malloy was the kind of man who, when he found a thing standing in his way, did not think about going around it. He thought about how to remove it. I keep coming back even now to the nights I spent training that young man, because they are the thing that still aches. There is a bond that forms between the man who teaches you to survive a fire and the man who learns it. You are trusting each other with your lives, literally, in the dark, in the heat, and it makes a closeness that is hard to explain to people who have not done it. I taught Derek to trust me at his back in the worst places on earth, and I trusted him at mine. I remember pulling him out of a doorway once when a ceiling was about to come down, and the look he gave me afterward, the look of a man who knows another man just saved his life. I remember buying him his first good pair of boots when money was tight for him. Karen fed him at our table more Sundays than I can count. I would have said right up until the day he stood up with that folder that Derek Malloy was as close to a son as I would ever have. That is the part I have had to make peace with, and I have not fully managed it. It was not a stranger who tried to destroy me. It was a young man I loved, who looked at everything I had given him and decided it was not enough, and that the fastest way to what he wanted led straight through the man who had given it. There is a particular cold that comes with that kind of betrayal. I hope you never feel it, but if you ever do, I promise you that you can come through it without becoming cold yourself, and that is worth more than the winning. The opportunity came from the money, and I have to explain the money because it is where the whole thing turned. A volunteer fire department runs on two kinds of funds. There is the town budget, which is tracked tightly, and then there is the department's own fund, the money we raise ourselves, the pancake breakfasts and the boot drives and the annual fundraiser, money we use for the things the town budget will not cover, new gear, training, the little things that keep a volunteer department alive. For years, I had been the one who kept that fund, because everyone trusted me with it, which is a thing I was proud of and which became, in Derek's hands, the knife he put in my back. Because when you are the man whose name is on the fund, you are also the man who can most easily be accused of stealing from it. Derek understood that. He understood it long before I did. Here is what Derek did, and I did not piece it all together until much later. Derek got himself appointed as the assistant treasurer to help me with the fund, and I was glad for the help, because I was busy and I trusted him. And over several months, Derek quietly began to steal from that fund, small amounts at first, then larger, skimming from the fundraiser cash, from the boot drive, from the accounts he now had access to. But Derek was not stupid. He was not stealing just to steal. He was stealing in a way that built a trail, and the trail pointed at me. He created discrepancies and made sure my name and my access were all over them. He was, I would come to understand, doing two things with one crime. He was lining his own pockets, and he was building a bomb with my name on the fuse to be set off at exactly the right moment. And the right moment, for Derek, was the retirement of Chief Brenner and the decision about who would replace him. The bomb went off at a department meeting in the early spring. Derek stood up with a folder, and with a great show of reluctance and sorrow, he said that he had been reviewing the fund accounts as assistant treasurer, and that he had found serious discrepancies, thousands of dollars missing, and that all of the irregularities traced back to the treasurer, to me. He said it broke his heart to bring it forward. He said he had wrestled with it for weeks, and he laid out his folder, the doctored records, the trail he had built, and he pointed it, with tears in his eyes, at the man who had trained him. I sat there in that firehouse, in the department my family had served for 3 generations, and I listened to a young man I had taught to save lives accuse me of stealing from it, and I was so stunned I could barely speak. I said it was not true that I had never taken $1, but I could hear how it sounded, the accused man's automatic denial, and I could see, going around that room, on the faces of men I had served beside for years, the terrible thing beginning to happen. Doubt. The doubt was the whole weapon. Derek did not need to prove I was a thief. He only needed to make people wonder, and a folder full of discrepancies with my name on it was more than enough to make them wonder. I have gone over that meeting in my mind more times than I can count, and the thing that still amazes me is how good Derek was at it, how completely he had thought it through. He did not overplay it. He did not seem gleeful. He played reluctance perfectly, the loyal young firefighter forced by his conscience to expose a beloved mentor, and that performance did more damage than any accusation shouted in anger could have. He even said at one point, his voice catching, that he prayed there was some explanation, that no one wanted to be wrong about this more than he did. It was masterful. And I, who was actually innocent, sat there and did the thing innocent people do, which is sputter and deny and look to a room full of doubt, exactly as guilty as a man caught. That is the cruel physics of a good frame. The liar gets to be calm because he has rehearsed, and the honest man gets to be rattled because he has just been ambushed, and to a watching room, calm looks like truth, and rattled looks like guilt. I learned something in that firehouse that night that has never left me. Being innocent is not enough. Being innocent and staying calm, that is the thing that saves you. Because your composure is the only part of the truth the room can see before the evidence arrives. I did not have my composure that first night. Derek took it from me, but I got it back, and I made sure that the next time we were in a room together in front of the town, I was the calm one and he was the one about to be ambushed. What happened next was the worst season of my life, worse than any fire. I was suspended from the department pending an investigation. The story got out, the way everything gets out in a town of 4,000, and it got out in Derek's version because Derek made sure of that. Roy Whitaker, the assistant chief, the man in line to be chief, had been stealing from the fire department. From the fire department. In a town like Copper Creek, there is almost no accusation more damning, because the department is sacred. It is the thing that comes when your children are in danger, and a man who would steal from it is lower than almost any other kind of man. People I had known my whole life, people whose lives I had literally saved, began to look at me differently. Some crossed the street. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when I walked in. My wife, Karen, came home from the pharmacy in tears one afternoon because 2 women she had known for 20 years had gone quiet and cold when she approached. My name, the Whitaker name, 3 generations of running toward danger for this town, was being dragged through the mud by a man I had trained, and for a while it seemed like there was nothing I could do but watch it happen. Let me tell you what those weeks did inside our house, because the public shame is only half of it, and the private half is where a man really finds out what he is made of. Karen and I stopped going out together because we could not stand to watch the conversation stop when we walked in. I stopped sleeping, and I am a man who has always slept even after the worst calls. I would lie awake and replay 25 years, wondering how many of the people I had helped were now, at that very moment, believing the worst of me, and the arithmetic of it was unbearable. Karen took the harder blow in some ways, because a wife has to watch her husband be destroyed and cannot fix it, and I would find her crying in the kitchen and pretending she was cutting onions. There was a night, a bad one, when I sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, and I said to Karen that maybe we should just sell the house and leave Copper Creek, go somewhere no one knew the story. And Karen, who is stronger than I am, looked at me and said, "Roy Whittaker, your grandfather is buried in this town, and your name is on a plaque in that firehouse. We are not running from a lie. We are going to stand right here and let the truth catch up." She was right about all of it. A man is very lucky if, in the worst season of his life, there is one person beside him who refuses to let him become smaller than he is. Karen was that for me, and everything I did next, I did, because she would not let me run. Now here is the moment, and by now you know this is the moment I always come to, the moment everything turns, because there is a version of Roy Whittaker who, in that season, went to the firehouse and grabbed Derek Malloy by the collar and threw him against a wall and demanded he tell the truth. There is a version of me who stood up in the middle of the grocery store and shouted that I was innocent, that Derek was the thief, that everyone had it exactly backward. I felt every bit of that rage on the worst nights, all of it at once. And I did not do any of it, and I need you to understand why, because it is the whole lesson of this story and of every story I have ever told. A man who has been accused of stealing, who then grabs his accuser by the collar, who shouts and rages in public, does not look innocent. He looks guilty and dangerous. Derek's entire frame depended on making me look like a man capable of doing wrong, and every time I lost my temper, I would be painting his picture for him. The angry man confirms the accusation. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than any burning building, and I stayed calm. I let them think what they thought for now, and I got quiet, and I got careful, and I started, methodically, the way 25 years of emergencies had taught me to work a problem, to figure out what was actually true, because there is always a real cause, and a real cause leaves real evidence, and evidence can be found by a man patient enough to look. And almost immediately, working the problem instead of the rage, I saw the crack in Derek's whole frame, the crack that would eventually bring the whole thing down on him. To accuse me of taking the money, Derek had built a timeline. His folder specified dates, specific dates on which the discrepancies occurred, specific occasions on which the fund had supposedly been accessed, and money removed by me. He had to do that. A theft accusation needs a when. And the moment I sat down with Karen and looked hard at those specific dates, something jumped out at me that Derek, in his arrogance, had completely overlooked. On at least 2 of the key dates in his timeline, the dates the money supposedly vanished from the fund by my hand, I had not been anywhere near that fund or that firehouse office. I had been on calls. On one of those nights, I had been at a structure fire on the north end of town for 6 hours. On another, I had been on a bad car accident on the mountain road half the night. And I knew with the certainty of 25 years that a firefighter's calls are not a matter of memory or opinion. They are recorded. Every single one. This is the thing Derek Malloy never understood, the thing his ambition blinded him to. When you answer a fire call, it goes into the record, and not a record I control. The county dispatch center logs the time the tones drop, the time the trucks roll, the time we arrive, the time we clear, all of it to the minute in an official system. The department keeps run reports for every incident, signed, listing every firefighter who responded. There are radio logs. There are, in the modern day, timestamps on everything. My whereabouts on the nights Derek claimed I was robbing the fund were not a story I would have to convince anyone of. They were written in the county's own official records, unfakeable, unarguable, backed by a whole crew of fellow firefighters who had stood beside me at those very fires. Derek had built a frame that required me to have been in the firehouse office stealing money on nights when the official record showed me, beyond any doubt, standing in front of a burning building with a hose in my hands, with witnesses, with a truck, with a siren. He had given me an alibi written in fire. I remember the exact moment I saw it. At the kitchen table with Karen, both of us exhausted, Derek's dates spread out in front of us. I had been staring at them as an accused man stares at the thing accusing him, with dread. And then Karen, reading over my shoulder, tapped one of the dates and said, "Roy, wasn't that the night of the Peterson fire? You were gone until morning." And it was like a door opening in a dark room, because she was right. I grabbed a pen, and I went down Derek's list of dates, and for one after another, I could place myself somewhere the official record would confirm, and for at least two of the key ones I had been on major calls for hours, with the whole crew. I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh, the first time I had laughed in weeks because the arrogance of it was almost beautiful. Derek had been so focused on building a paper trail through the fund that he had never stopped to check the most basic thing about the man he was framing, which was where that man actually was on the nights in question. He assumed my whereabouts were a fog I could not prove. He forgot or never understood that a firefighter does not have private nights the way other men do. When the tones drop, you are logged, timed, witnessed, recorded. My life, the very thing that made me worth framing, the 25 years of service, was also the thing that made the frame impossible, because those years were written down, every call of them, in records Derek Malloy could not touch. Karen looked at me across that table, and for the first time in weeks there was something other than fear in her eyes. There was the beginning of the fight. I did not run to anyone with this, and I want you to understand the discipline of it, because it is the whole difference between winning and merely being right. I could have marched into the next town meeting waving the dispatch logs, but Harold, the department's old chief, Walt Brenner, had taught me something decades ago about fires that applied perfectly here. He used to say, "Do not put water on what you can see, put it on the source, or the fire just moves." If I only proved my alibi, I would clear myself maybe, but the money would still be missing, and the doubt would linger, and Derek would still be out there, still the thief, still gunning for the chief's job, free to try again. Clearing my name was not enough. I had to put the water on the source. I had to not only prove I did not do it, but catch the man who did, in a way as undeniable as my alibi. And to do that, I needed Derek to keep believing he had won, so he would keep doing the thing that would destroy him, which was stealing. So while I quietly gathered my alibi, the dispatch logs, the run reports, the radio records, the sworn word of the firefighters who had been beside me, I did something else, something that took nerve, and I did it with the help of the one man in the department I knew beyond all doubt was not part of it, old Chief Walt Brenner himself, who had never for 1 second believed I was a thief, and who was heartbroken and furious about what was being done to me and to his department. Walt and I set a trap. We knew there was another fundraiser coming, the big annual one, which would bring a large amount of cash into the fund, the exact kind of opportunity Derek had been feeding on. And we knew Derek, as assistant treasurer, would have access and would, if he ran true to form, skim from it. So working with Walt, and because we did this right with a quiet word to the county sheriff so that nothing we did would ever be improper, we prepared. A portion of the fundraiser cash was marked. The bills were photographed, their serial numbers recorded, before they ever went into the fund. And then we set it where the money went, and we waited to see who would reach in. I want to be careful describing this part, the same way I would be careful on a fireground, because doing it wrong could have wrecked everything, and I would not want anyone hearing this to go set traps on their own and end up in trouble or blow a real case. We did not freelance. The reason Walt Brenner was the right partner, beyond my absolute trust in him, was that Walt had the standing to bring in the sheriff quietly and do this properly, so that whatever we caught would hold up, and nothing we did could be called entrapment or tampering. That mattered to me for its own sake too, because I was not going to clear my name by cutting a corner. If I was going to prove I was the honest man in this story, I was going to do it honestly all the way down. So it was done right, with the sheriff informed, the bills documented before they ever entered the fund, everything by the book. And then came the hardest part, which was the waiting and the acting. Because for the trap to work, Derek had to keep believing he was winning, so I had to keep being, in public, the quiet, beaten, disgraced man he thought he had made me. I had to let him smirk at me across the firehouse. I had to swallow it when he offered me a false, pitying word of sympathy in front of others, playing the sorrowful young man forced to expose his mentor. Every hour of that was acid, but Walt would catch my eye across the room in those moments, just a flicker, and it steadied me, because Walt knew what I knew, that the man doing the smirking was walking, a little more every day, toward a fire he could not see. Derek reached in. Of course he did. He could not help himself, the same way the con men and the thieves in all these stories cannot help themselves, because the very greed that makes them predators also makes them predictable. Within days of that fundraiser, the marked bills were gone from the fund, taken by someone with access, someone who thought the books were his to quietly bleed, someone who had no idea that the specific bills he had just pocketed had been photographed and recorded and were, at that very moment, a loaded case sitting in his own pocket. Derek had spent 2 months building a frame around me out of doctored paper, and in a few careless days, chasing the same easy money he always chased, he had put the real, physical, recorded evidence of his own theft into his own trousers. That is the town meeting I began this story with. It was the meeting where the department's fund situation was to be formally addressed, where Derek expected, I am sure, to complete his victory, to see me finished and himself elevated. The room was packed, the whole town, because the whole town had been following the scandal of the firefighter who stole from the fire department. And with the sheriff present, and with old Chief Brenner standing beside me, the truth came out in the order that made it undeniable. First, my alibi. The dispatch logs were presented. The official county records showing that on the specific dates in Derek's own timeline, the dates I had supposedly been stealing from the fund, I had been at a structure fire and at a highway accident for hours, with the whole crew as witnesses. You could feel the room shift as that landed, because it was not my word against Derek's anymore. It was Derek's story against the county's own records, and the county's records do not have a motive. The frame did not just weaken. It shattered all at once because a timeline is only as strong as its weakest date, and Derek's timeline had put me robbing a firehouse on nights I was demonstrably fighting fires across town. I watched it move through the room like a change in the weather. These were people who knew what a dispatch log was, who had family on the department, who understood that you cannot fake being at a 6-hour structure fire with a whole crew around you. I saw a man in the 3rd row who had crossed the street from me at the post office 2 weeks earlier, put his hand over his mouth. I saw one of the women who had gone cold to Karen at the pharmacy close her eyes. The doubt that Derek had so carefully planted and watered for 2 months did not just fade. It reversed and began flowing the other way, toward him, and you could feel the whole room begin to ask the question that Derek had never wanted anyone to ask, which was simple and deadly. If Roy did not take the money, and the records prove Roy did not take the money, then who did? And who built all this paper to say that he did? There is only one person who benefits from framing a man, and that is the person who did the thing he was framed for. The room was most of the way to that thought on its own by the time the deputy ever asked Derek to empty his pockets. The marked bills did not create the truth that night. They only confirmed, in a way no one could argue with, the truth the dispatch logs had already set loose in that room. And then, while the room was still absorbing that, while the doubt that Derek had aimed at me for 2 months swung around and settled squarely onto him, the sheriff's deputy asked Derek Malloy to empty his pockets. And Derek, who had walked into that room to bury me, pulled out a folded stack of marked $20 bills, the exact bills photographed and recorded 3 days earlier, taken from the fund by the real thief. There was no story he could tell. There is no innocent reason to be carrying the marked, recorded proceeds of a theft that the man you framed can prove he did not commit. The room understood it in a single breath, and Derek Malloy looked up from that money in his hand, across a silent town hall full of the people whose respect he had stolen along with mine, and his eyes found me at the back of the room, and he understood, at last and completely, that the patient old man he had branded a thief had not spent 2 months drowning in shame. He had spent them building the fire that was now consuming Derek, and lighting it calmly at exactly the right moment. I did not gloat. I did not stand up and make a speech. I did not say a single word to Derek Malloy, not that night, not since. I did not have to. The records spoke, and the marked bills spoke, and the whole town heard them speak, and that was 1,000 times more powerful than anything I could have shouted. Derek was arrested that night. The theft, once it was the sheriff's business, and not a folder Derek controlled, unraveled completely, because the real trail, the true one, led straight to him, to the money he had actually taken over those months, and now that everyone was finally looking in the right direction, it was not hard to find. Derek Malloy is working through a legal process now that I am told does not end well for a man caught red-handed with marked evidence in his pocket, and I take no joy in his ruin. But I will tell you plainly that a man who steals from the people who run into fire for this town and then tries to destroy the reputation of the man who trained him to do it earns every single thing that lands on him. I did not do it to Derek. He did it to himself with his own greed on the county's own records, with marked money in his own pocket. I only refused to look away and refused to lose my temper, and waited for the truth to catch up to him, which it always does. Here is the part that healed me, and it was not Derek's arrest. The town came back, and I want to be honest that it was not simple, because a town that turns on you leaves a mark even when it turns back, and I had learned who crossed the street and who did not, and that is not a thing you fully unknow. But the people came back, in the awkward, decent way that small-town people do, with a casserole left on the porch, with a hand on the shoulder at the hardware store, with a quiet, "I'm sorry, Roy, I should have known better." The two women who had gone cold to Karen at the pharmacy both came to our door separately ashamed, and Karen, who is a better person than I am, forgave them both. Old Chief Brenner stood up at the next department meeting and said, in front of everyone, that in 30 years he had never been prouder of any firefighter than he was of the man who had been falsely accused and had cleared his name not with his fists and not with his voice, but with patience and with the truth, the way a real fire officer solves any problem, by staying calm when everyone else is panicking and putting the water on the sauce. I became chief of the Copper Creek Volunteer Fire Department that summer. I did not become chief over Derek's ruin. I became chief the way I always would have, by earning it over 25 years, and Derek's crime only delayed it, it did not create it. Chief Brenner pinned the badge on me himself at a ceremony in the firehouse, with Karen there and the whole department. And a good part of the town, including, I noticed, some of the people who had crossed the street standing in the back, and I let them stand there, because my father taught me that this department belongs to the whole town, even the parts of it that doubted me, and a chief does not hold grudges against the people he has sworn to run into fire for. When Walt pinned that badge on, his hands were shaking a little, the way an old man's hands do, and he leaned in close just for me and said quietly, "Your dad would be busting his buttons right now, Roy." And I had to look at the floor for a second to keep myself together, because there it was, the whole thing. 3 generations of Whitakers and 1 badge, and a town that had almost believed the worst and then remembered the best. I thought about my father setting down his coffee on Christmas Eve. I thought about the anonymous knock, the sack on the step, all the quiet decency that a town like this runs on, and that a man like Derek had gambled he could poison for his own gain. He was wrong. It turns out you cannot poison 25 years that easily. It turns out a name built one call at a time, in the dark, in the cold, is a great deal harder to burn down than a man in a hurry imagines. I gave a short speech. I did not mention Derek's name. I talked about my father and my grandfather and 25 years of the siren going off in the dark. And I talked about trust, about how the whole thing, the whole department, the whole town runs on trust, and how the worst thing about what had been done was not to me but to that trust, and how we were going to rebuild it one call at a time, the only way it is ever built. And then, that same night, the tones dropped for a car in a ditch out on the mountain road, and I pulled on my gear, Chief now, and I went, because that is the whole point, that is the only point, and it always has been. So let me leave you with what 25 years and 1 betrayal taught me, and then I will let you go. The people who frame you, who steal your good name to save their own, count on the same thing every one of them counts on. They count on the fact that an innocent man, when he is accused, gets loud. They count on your rage, because your rage is the brush they will use to paint you guilty, and a shouting, collar-grabbing, red-faced man looks exactly like the kind of man who would do the thing you are accused of. So do not give them that man. Get quiet. Get careful. Trust that your real life, honestly lived, has left an honest record somewhere. In the logs, in the timestamps, in the sworn memory of the people who stood beside you, and that no frame is stronger than its weakest date. And then do not just clear your name. Put the water on the sauce. Let the man who framed you keep believing he has won, so that his own nature keeps working against him. And be there calm and ready with the truth in your hand at the exact moment he reaches into the fire he built for you and finds you already standing in it. My whole life is written in fire, on the county's own records, on the nights I ran toward the thing everyone else runs from. Derek Malloy framed a man whose alibi was on fire. He never had a chance. He just didn't know it until the very end. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. And tell me honestly, has anyone ever tried to destroy your good name? And did the truth come out in the end? Or are you still waiting for it to? I read every single comment, and I want to hear it. Take care of yourselves, be the kind of neighbor who runs toward the fire, and I will see you in the next one.